Hello, YouTube! We're coming to you live from twitch.tv/Teddles to talk about an exclusive Shadowlands interview with Ion Wowhead, where he talks about a lot of random stuff. And yeah, we're basically gonna go through. I'm going through this live on stream right now, and we're gonna talk through some of the stuff that is on the docket, where he goes through a lot of different and unique stuff. All right. So first and foremost, we have pre-patch and Season 1 preparation. So in the first week of BFA Season 1, Mythic Plus Keystones were based off the final week of Legion, if you guys remember that. So should players do a high Keystone in this week, that they get a high Keystone for the first week of Shadowlands Season 1, or will Keystone levels be reset? Ion Wowhead says they will be reset. So I know that I was going to do a key this week at like a 20 or something, but they said that it is being reset. So now I will, in fact, not be doing a key this week. So nor should you. So yeah, basically you do not have to do a high keystone the last week of the pre-patch, which is this week. Class and covenant balanced. Damn, this is a lot. So the first question is, how do you plan to handle the balancing of covenants and legendaries after launch when players have already invested resources in those decisions? The answer is there conservatively, understandably so. We understand that players have a permanent or heavy instrument in something, and we don't want to change that out from under them. That said, if it turns out they're outliers or really harmful to overall game balance, that the community figures out some combination or synergy that we've overlooked, things like Blaster Master, Mechagon Bracers, or Lucid Dreams or Fire Mage synergy come to mind. He just listed 3 Fire Mage things. All right. Then yes, we make tuning changes, but we would like to do that with a cautious eye and not upset the ranking of things. If there's something that's the best for certain situations by a whole lot, we would maybe bring that down, but not quite as much as pure balance would dictate, or maybe not have done face the same issues in beta so that players aren't regretting their choices or feeling like they should have done something else. This is actually really important. I think that this is that they're not going to just completely gut something if they overlooked it during beta. They just remember this for the future. I don't know if this will actually remain true, but what he has said here is, I think, actually great news personally, because it means that like stuff won't just be completely gutted out of orbit. But I think history would say that you should be cautious. The next question is, would you change covenants more drastically between patches or raids? The answer is yes. I think patches where larger changes could occur. We would look ahead at major content updates and include new legendary fixes that players can seek out. Oh, okay. So they're saying that they're adding new legendary effects. There's a bit more of a reset at that comes with that, and we also have the ability. It's not something we will do lightly, but if we... Oh, okay, never mind. They're saying that they may not end up doing it, but they can if they think that it is important. They can also reset the covenant switching cooldown, or the history of you left this covenant, to make that more of a seamless transition if we have to make some larger changes but don't have any plans to do that, just in case measures. Okay, so basically they're saying if they nerf your fucking Azurite, okay, using a BFA equivalent, if they completely gut your Azurite 1 week into the patch, they may end up resetting your CD on your reforging cost or whatever, right? Which I think this is nice. I think these are good things that he has said here. I think that everything he said thus far makes a lot of sense for me, assuming that he does follow through. Right. A lot of consumables class utility removed. What was the design decision behind this? Okay, that's actually a really good question, I think. A lot of it is underscoring class utility and class diversity within groups. Many of those consumables were used to cover up for stacking of a certain class. Ideally, whether you're in a dungeon group or whatever context you're in, you should want as many different classes represented as possible, and the players should be happy that, oh cool, we have a priest with us today, that means we're going to have a little bit of extra health. Some of these things are otherwise borderline one-shots in this high key, and we have a little bit of extra cushion against it. Okay. Same for each of the other buffs that are available. That's something that has been a part of WoW for a long time, and we'd like to return to, as class identity. At the end of the day, it's essential to play with your friends. We don't want these differences to be large enough to feel like you can't do that, but all else being equal, if you're a pug leader trying to fill out a group, of mix of classes should be better than bringing multiples to the same one. Personally, I'm not a fan of this. I prefer a little bit more homogenization in regards to Mythic Plus, because you only have 5 slots. But I do understand where this is coming from. I mean, this makes a lot of sense in regards to how they've changed drums versus bloodlust, how they changed... Okay, they removed a fucking engineering battle res, but they ended up adding it back. And how they've removed all of the class-specific buffs from, like, scrolls and stuff like that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. I personally prefer a little bit more homogenization and bring the player, not the class kind of stuff. But I think that class buffs aren't enough to where that's like a huge outlying problem. I don't know. I think this is a fine answer. Personally, I would have done it differently. However, I think that this is also honestly fair. Have you considered a more revolving door type of class balancing as certain specs tend to dominate more often? Okay, fair enough. Not deliberately. I don't think we're considered saying, all right, it's your turn to be dominant, and then the next time around, part of the challenge is that this is something that we still talk about and we don't have a perfect answer to. People have different strengths and weaknesses, and there are certain pieces of toolkits that tend to lend themselves particularly to things that have high-end mythic progression group value, particularly world-first groups where they're going to do things under-geared. There's a reason why a lot of times you've seen Brewmaster Monk tanks used, or back in Legion wherever Guardian Druids had gigantic health pools, they were used heavily because they were the hardest tanks to spike whenever you're tanking stuff under-geared or you're under-healing fights. Okay, that's actually a really fair point. Longer term, we saw much better representation with complete diversity about who is tanking, but in those situations, that was priceless. Yeah, okay, fair. Disc Priest and their absorbs again are here doing this at the end of your gear thresholds. Both the extra cushion they provide and the damage output when you're trying to hit some 0.01% DPS check, as opposed to trying to succeed on the mechanics, which is what later even cutting edge guilds have to deal with. These things are uniquely valuable there, and so part of the challenge on our end is not wanting to gut the toolkits of those classes and specs that are part of what makes them interesting. But we also recognize that, yeah, it's not ideal if you're a player of a different class that you prefer to play with and you want to participate in cutting edge activity. I agree that you have more work to do. So I think for 99% of the players, you can truly play any class and spec and succeed in doing so. If you're trying to literally win the MDI, or if you're trying to get a world first or a world top 10 kill in mythic raid bosses, then every tiny little bit matters, and there are differences there. But I think that's part of the ethos of those players, and our primary focus is on the vast majority of the players of the player base, including those who are doing high-end competitive content, and we think we've been much more successful there. Ooh, okay. I actually think that Okay, so he's basically putting it off on the player base, saying that he believes that the classes are fundamentally balanced, that it is a community perception issue, where he says that for 99% of the players, you can truly play any class and spec and succeed in doing so. I actually think that he's right. I think that he's actually spot on, and I think that people are typically... there's a lot of Fodom reroll meta in regards to how people are looking to play World of Warcraft in this day and age, and I think that it actually ends up being an issue of, like, this is how community perception ends up portraying it, or world first guilds or MDI ends up portraying it, and it's not an actual issue of class balance, it's more of an issue of perception. I do think he kind of dodged the question about the revolving door of class balancing, and specs do tend to dominate more often. I think that he's saying that they didn't want to gut their toolkits, but, like, realistically, shit like Disc Priest has been good for as long as I've played this game. Brewmaster Monk has been OP for literally 2 expansions at this point. You're always going to have a Havoc Demon Hunter, like a Demon Hunter and a Monk now in a raid for raid buffs. So there's always going to be stuff like that. I don't know. He did kind of dodge the question, but at the same time, I do think that this answer is kind of fair. Covenant swapping and renown. How often does a bonus renown show up on the renown? How often does a bonus renown show up on the renown catch-up system kicks in? Okay, basically, how often do you end up getting the bonus renown whenever the catch-up system kicks in? For those who don't know, whenever you swap a covenant, you have to re-grind out your renown soulbind to be able to get, like, your more potency slots, fill out your full tree. But there's a catch-up system that kicks in that allows you to try to catch up a little bit more quickly. So that's what they're talking about here. So and there's not a lot that's actually known about the catch-up system or the renown catch-up as a whole, so they're asking questions based on this. And the answer is, the more renown you're missing effectively, the faster acquisition is. So it sort of slows down asymptomatically as long as you're approaching fully caught up. If you're a few weeks behind, you can expect it to be 100% of the time from the particular daily or weekly activities like callings. The more repeatable dungeons may have a lower chance the closer you get. Okay, I mean, I think that's fair. It's a catch-up system at the end of the day, right? They don't want you swapping your covenants, but they are giving you a little bit of a way of catching back up. How often or how long will it take you to get caught up on Renown if you swap Covenants? In general, our goal is if you swap Covenants, you should, within a few days of gameplay, be at a point where you're viable in your new Covenant. Maybe not perfectly optimal, but a couple weeks after that, you should be totally fine. And by totally fine, I mean completely caught up as if you've never been part of a different Covenant. Okay, that's... okay. He does go on to elaborate. All right, that's a fair assessment. I was like, what the hell is this answer? But he does go on to elaborate a little bit further. It's not intended to be a massive burden, but you probably don't want to change the Covenants the night before a day of your planned Mythic progression raid, where you're trying to push raiding in Arena. But if you do have a few days to make that switch, you should be fine. Okay, I think that's... they don't want you swapping, right? I don't think that this... I don't like the... Personally, anecdotally, I don't think that this is fair, because I think that you should be a little bit more free to be able to swap Covenants, but, like... with the catch-up that they're giving you, this is like, all right. I thought that this line is actually really funny. Within a few days of gameplay, be at a point where you're viable in your new Covenant. You're like, what does that even mean? But he does go on to elaborate a little bit further. All right, how do Covenant weapons work? If you swap your Covenant, do you lose your weapon? I need to double check that, actually. In terms of the intent, appearances are generally tied to being in the Covenant, but if you want to ride a Larian and have a glowing Kyrian armor, you should be in the Kyrian while you do that. If you leave the Covenant, you will retain those appearances in your collection but not be able to use them. Okay. If you come back to the Covenant, this is a fucking transmog question, I don't really care about this, but if you come back to the Covenant, you're going to be able to use them again in regards to your actual weapon. We will not want it to be the case. If you leave your Covenant, then you're literally weaponless, so we'll make sure that that works. Alright, that seems fair. With no Flight Master Whistle in Shadowlands, are there any plans to quickly teleport to your Covenant Sanctum from anywhere? If you upgrade your transportation network to level 3, that actually also adds a portal to Oribos to your Sanctum, so at that point, people will feel free to set their hearts in the Sanctum and have free access to Oribos and the other zones. That becomes a quick shortcut. Okay, that's fine. Those are a couple questions I care about, with like the Renown catch up, a couple stuff I didn't care too terribly much about. All right, so legendaries. Ooh, goodness. Are there any catch-up mechanisms for Soul Ash? We're happy with the overall rate of acquisition. A few people joining the Shadowlands later will have access to more of Torghast, since only the first 3 layers will be available until Castle Nathria opens and Season 1 starts. That's actually huge. Then 4 through 6, and eventually 7 and 8. Ultimately, with legendaries, since there's an equip limit of 1, getting your first legendary makes you equal to someone in terms of moment-to-moment power as someone who has 3 to 4 legendaries who can still only wear 1. Catch up in the sense of more options isn't quite the same as being strictly behind someone's item level or artifact power like in the past. Okay, so that's correct, what he said in the past. What he said on the back half of this. This is actually really important. Him talking about only the first 3 layers of Torghast will be open until Castle Nathria. That means that you're only able to get a certain amount of Soul Ash, and you're probably going to be only able to craft 1 legendary through Heroic Week, versus previously where you would be able to craft multiple. And so this is going to slow down the pace of progression of being able to obtain a couple legendaries for Mythic release of the raid, but like as time goes on, like he's saying, 4 through 6 and eventually 7 and 8, meaning that you'll be able to get substantially more Soul Ash and craft more legendaries. That's actually pretty big news. I think it's really rough, especially people who wanted to play multiple specs whenever Castle Nathria Heroic ended up launching, because you're not going to be able to have multiple legendaries to be able to equip whenever Nathria opens. But I don't know, I guess they just really want to deter you from multi-specking this expansion, and this is just another way of artificially slowing this down for no real reason. Because like imagine being like your 5th healer or like a backup tank or whatever, right? And your main spec is DPS. You're not going to have a second legendary. You're just like, well, imagine being a multi-spec, or like you're not going to have multiple legendaries. Like, what the hell? Or like even if you're like a pure, you're absolutely not going to be able to swap. Like, say you crafted a fire mage legendary, you're not going to be able to swap to Frost, and you're just going to be losing significant amount of damage. Next question. Are the legendary patterns 100% drop chance whenever you meet the requirements? It depends, not always. In general, things that have longer lockouts are, but things that are more repeatable are not. If there's one that can drop from a dungeon boss, you may have to run that dungeon multiple times. If there's something that comes from a world boss that's on a multi-week rotation and you only get one shot a week, you're going to get the recipe whenever you kill the boss, because that would be a bit much. All right, that seems fair. Is there bad luck protection on the legendary recipes then? I don't recall, but we're not really talking about Legion legendary rarity. They should be something that a player, if they set their minds to, can obtain reliably. That's fair. I actually think that that's a good thing. Important to note. As a whole, legendaries, the Soul Ash from Torghast thing is probably the biggest deal. You're going to be slow off the expansion start. Like, really, really, really slow. So do remember that. Make sure that you craft your legendary. If I had to give you any advice, make sure you craft your legendary as late as possible. And if you're going into heroic, make sure you're only playing one fucking spec. Or your guild knows that you're going to suck acid and off spec if you have to play it. Conduits. There's not a lot known about conduits, but I think they're mostly fleshed out. How do PvP, Mythic Plus, and World Boss conduits drop at higher ranks, and raid conduits drop at lower ranks? Okay, this is actually important. So for those who don't understand the system, you're able to obtain ranks 1 through 7 on your conduits, but they're item level dependent. Like rank 7 of a conduit's like 135 or whatever, right? Let's just use 135. And rank 6 of the conduit is 120. Obviously for raid, like raid drops 135 loot and it drops 120 loot, so you're able to get rank 6 and rank 7 from there, where like some conduits only come from dungeons, some conduits only come from like emissary caches or whatever the hell they call them now, so you're not able to get those at the level 7 level. That's what they're asking about. There's been a lot of data mining of ranks as a behind the scenes thing, but in terms of player facing, they're just item level. Think about how relics worked in Legion. Things that drop a item level of a certain gear across the board will drop conduits at that item level. So if you kill a boss on normal Nathra, you'll get an item level 200 conduit. And if you do, probably getting the numbers wrong, Mythic 5 or 6 out of the end of run chest from that run, you may get a chance of getting an item level 200 conduit. PvP vendors will offer higher item level conduits. As your rating increases, then those can be purchased, just the way that item level works overall. Same with world bosses. The exceptions there that the Venari specifically have a random conduit that you don't have an item from, and the Venari will basically fill in the holes in your collection. That could theoretically give you a 226 conduit if you have a bunch of 226s and you're missing some. But if you're someone who has only item level 180 conduits, then you would get a 180 something from the Venari. Okay, well, that makes sense. So some of the ones that are not obtainable through like easy to define means, such as like dungeons and raids, like you're going to be able to get it based on your item level. Okay, I think that makes sense. Sometimes. Are there any conduits from the Great Vault? There are no conduits from the Great Vault. Conduits drop as a bonus item, so if you get one from your End of Dungeon Mythic Plus, it's not replacing a piece of regular loot that you would have gotten. You'll get a conduit for your class. Currently, if you get lucky, you can get multiple conduits. If Boss 2 drops a Potency, and Boss 4 drops a Fury conduit? Is he talking about Finesse? Oh, never mind. He didn't say Potency, he said Prot, and Boss 4 drops a Fury conduit. You could possibly get both from a single run. No conduits from the Great Vault currently. Alright, I think that makes sense. Conduits are essentially just item level though. Which, okay, I guess that's reasonable. Rating. For the rating row in the Great Vault, are you able to get weapon tokens or pieces of loot from bosses you have not killed yet? You should be able to get weapon tokens, but don't 100% quote me on that. Alright. I'm pretty sure you can, they're just loot. For things like the end bosses or higher tier stuff, you can't get bosses from the Great Vault if you never killed that boss. Now that's not a week by week thing. There's no I'm going to skip these bosses and game the system, but you can't just go in with 3 mythic boss kills under your belt and then get Denathris or Stone Legion Generals items. That's not possible. You have to kill them on mythic at least before those options become valid. Same for heroic, same for normal. Because for those who don't know, they drop 5 item level higher loot. So that is, I think this is actually a good response. This is reasonable. This is what everybody hoped for. I don't think anybody really wanted it to be pretty brutal. What the hell? How many pieces of loot are going to drop from a mythic raid boss? 3. Okay, so currently on average you get like 5 pieces of loot per raid boss. Now they're lowering it down to 3. So this is the cost of Titan forging and like corruption going away, is that there's just like way less loot in the game. So on average you're going to get 3 pieces of loot, but whenever you get the loot that's going to be less replaceable, I don't know, man. 3 pieces of loot is pretty rough. I think that's a pretty low amount, especially if you're trying to like gear up an alt character like midway through the patch. But I guess we'll end up seeing. It's hard for me to say like beforehand how bad that's going to be, but this is the cost of removing Titan Forging and Corruption. Is 3 pieces of loot from Mythic Raid Boss. Any plans to bring back Guild Master Loot or Master Looter? None. All right, cool. All right. If you see armor stacking / funneling was a... Do you see armor stacking / funneling as a problem with personal loot? It's one of the edge case sort of abusey things that happens. The thing is that very high-end raid guilds do, and at the end of the day, they're going to do every possible thing to prepare and get every advantage for when Mythic opens. And if we lock those opportunities down, they would spend more time gearing other alts or doing other things. They're going to play as many hours to try to get a marginal advantage. I think it's not something that really affects the vast majority of players, and there's some positive elements to it as well that are a little gamey maybe, but it's the sort of thing that later in a tier you might see casters set their loot spec to a melee DPS spec because they want to try to get a trinket or some drop for someone in their raid group who's been chasing that after that, and those who are light social interactions that are fun and positive for everyone involved. We definitely don't see it as a huge advantage of the system that people can make all these leather raids, but by large it works for people. How big of a problem is it really, I guess is the question. And he says not that big. I don't know. I think that personally, I think it extends too far, but granted that's also because I'm in a Hall of Fame guild, so it's like hard to say. They clearly don't see it as like a big deal. Are tier sets still planned for later on in the expansion? They're still planned for later on in the expansion. We'll have more details to announce whenever we get there. The art from them is well underway, and they're going to be awesome. We're just as excited as the players are to see their return. Oh, fuck yeah, dude. That's actually badass. I'm super stoked for tier sets. I feel like the removal of tier sets was a big turning point for why some stuff doesn't get like tuned differently from patch to patch. And like they don't, like, tier sets interact with your spec and your kit directly, and they change your rotation from time to time. And sometimes you get a 12% damage bonus tier set. Sometimes you end up getting a 3% damage bonus tier set, and it's just like the pendulum always like swings back and forth. I think that this, like, tier sets actually, they're confirming their return, still planned for it at least, is super nice. Mythic Plus, are there any plans to nerf Bolstering or Necrotic in Shadowlands? No. No, bro. With current regards to this, we've been sensitive in making Shadowlands dungeons and responding to the great feedback we've gotten over the course of beta, recognizing that there's certain types of pulls that tend to be more frustrating with those affixes, and we always have the ability to exclude certain mobs from applying Necrotic from Bolstering on death, particularly weaker ones. I think whenever we look at some of the greatest frustrations over the course of BFA with some type of those mobs pulls in Shrine of the Storm or elsewhere, where you have like a single high health lieutenant mob and a bunch of small things, it becomes awkward to play around. We've avoided trying to make those types of pulls. I'm trying to think, are there big cases of that in Shadowlands dungeons? I'm trying to think about like one high health lieutenant and like a bunch of like mobs. They definitely do occur. Like the first part of Sanguine Depths, I think, is an example of that, where you have like the bats and the charge dudes. I think that's like a difference in health, but oh yeah, there's like Theater of Pain platforms as well, where there are mobs that have different certain health pools. There's like the first little bit of Plaguefall that has like all of they have the giants and then like the mushroom funguses that are nearby, but like it's impossible to really balance all of that. And then they have all the blobs and Plaguefall. I don't know. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. They also have like the last little bit of Plaguefall, from what I've seen as well. It has kind of brutal for bolstering, but whatever. Also, average pull sizes are a bit smaller across dungeons in general in Shadowlands. Now, of course, if what players are trying to do is round up 3 separate packs at the same time, they may create some of the situations for themselves, but at the end of the day, that's part of the point of the affixes. Part of the point of the affixes is vary players' approach to the dungeons and the optimal route from week to week. While we can understand it be frustrating to just want to pull everything and blow it up the way you might in a different week, things like explosive or bolstering and necrotic can complicate it, and that's deliberate. I think necrotic and bolstering are too much, personally. I don't think that I necessarily would want them completely removed, but I think fundamentally how they're set up right now, bolstering and necrotic, like, is unfun. And like, I don't think you should just be completely punished if you accidentally body pull a trash pack for bolstering, right? I think that that's where the problem ends up coming, is like you end up body pulling a trash pack and then you're just like, oh dude, this guy has 8 stacks of bolstering, great, we have to wipe now. And there's like no recourse there. Same with Necrotic. Necrotic is just incredibly unfun for tanks, and he says that some mobs don't melee and apply Necrotic. I think that that's wrong. I think literally every mob that melees you does apply Necrotic, at least in BFA and in Shadowlands Assumid. Maybe that's something that they'll look to change, but I don't know, man. I think that a good compromise for bolstering would have given a duration like bursting. I do think that's reasonable. And Necrotic, I think, should have just applied independent stacks and like, all right, so Necrotic, the duration may be a little bit longer. Like every stack may last for 10 seconds, but like it doesn't stack on itself, and it's like not refreshable. It's just an independent stack. I think that would have been a little bit more reasonable for those two fixes. But whatever, they're saying that they're not changing them. Do you think that the Maw is in a better state now, and why were some of the recent changes done to it? It comes a tremendous way in the last few months. There's a large multidisciplinary effort looking to rework every aspect of the Maw from moment-to-moment gameplay to different sub-regions within the Maw. The different rewards offered from the Venari to quests that are offered in content structure. I think originally it was a little bit too far on the sandboxy end of the spectrum, where there are cool elements to a sandbox gameplay, and it was certainly inspired by places like Timeless Isle or Mechagon. World of Warcraft doesn't actually do all too well whenever we just drop you in a place to say go do stuff, go do whatever. These things drop Stygia, there are quests, and there's progression now within the Maw. Yeah, you're also able to craft sockets, for those who don't know. You're able to like bank up, I think it's Stygia, and then craft or like buy things to socket your gear. I think that's actually pretty decent. It's going to be one of the things that you need to do on a weekly basis, is to get I think it's Stygia, to be able to like there's like a weekly cap on it or whatever, right? So you're going to be wanting to get your socketed item stuff. Yeah. The one thing I dread in Shadowlands is farming gems. Yeah, I mean, you're going to be sent back to horrific visions, dude. We've also significantly reworked Eye of the Jailer and how that interacts with various objects. There are some changes that have just rolled out into beta in the last few days. We saw some original reactions to the new penalties for Eye of the Jailer at level 3 and level 4. At level 4, a winged abductor would come and pick you up and basically carry you into the sky and drop you to your death. The length of the time out involved, and that was frustrating to a lot of players, and rightly so. You can purchase a counter to that from the Venari once you get on her good graces, and earn that with Stygia. In the meantime, we have wanted to give players more clear counterplay, so we reduced the health of the abductor significantly, so you can DPS them down and break out while you're in their clutches. You'll be gaining more Eye of the Jailer, since once you reach level 5, you basically have to leave them all. It's like corruption, for those who don't know. It's like a resource bar that you end up, like, the longer you're in the Maw, the more it ends up gaining, and like adverse effects end up occurring to you, like bullshit, like a Venari comes and like a Valkyr comes and picks you up and drops you to death. It's bullshit like that, right? In general, the way it's structured for all players, you're going to want to visit the Maw at least once a week to rescue souls and support your Covenant, to upgrade your Covenant feature and your Sanctum, and to gain a renown from that weekly quest. That's what you should be doing. You should be doing your weekly quest in the Maw. I think that's like all you really should be doing. There's obviously like, you can continue to grind Stygia, I think, but yeah, you should be doing it weekly for that. Beyond that, there's a sliding scale of efficiency. If you want to do the weeklies, they are very efficient in regards to Stygia and reputation, and you can do that. If you want to return to a more daily basis, the way that people engage with 8.3 assaults, many people just kind of would just do the wrappers and then come back the next week. Others would come back and do dailies on a more regular basis. They want to farm up more gorged eyes to socket all their gear. Players kind of pick their preferred level of interaction systems and rewards they want to get out of it. Okay, so basically they're saying that you can farm more sockets quicker if you go back to the Maw more frequently. However, the most efficient thing, of course, is going to be just doing the weekly cash renown weekly quest thing that you're wanting to be doing. Is the Torghast Twisting Corridor mount intended to be mountable in the Maw, and how many mounts work in the Maw? There are 2 mounts that will work in the Maw. That is one of them. The other one is a Shade Hound that is native to the Maw that can be obtained as a rare drop somewhere within it. So I wish players luck in seeking it. All right, that's kind of dope, but I don't really care about mounts personally, so it is what it is. Get bent, idiots. Checkmate, travel form nerds. Lore question. I'll be honest, I don't care about lore. Question about Nathanos. A day in Shadowlands? You describe an average day in Shadowlands for the average player. The average player is tricky as like a superposition of a bunch of different playstyles, but I'd say at a top level on a weekly basis, once you're max level, I think the main things that I encourage everyone to do are the core covenant progression over the course of the week. Do primarily world quests, though there are other sources like Castle Nathri and world bosses to get your anima for your covenant. That will give you one of your renowns for the week. Also go into the Maw, rescue souls. That will get your other renown for the week. If you have a new covenant campaign chapter that have not been unlocked to raise your renown, I would encourage doing those. In addition to rewarding renown, renown can also offer key things like access to a new soulbind or more of your covenant armor and whatnot. I would recommend that you do a Torghast run or two each week to get your soul ash to make progression towards legendaries. That's the third activity, and that's part of the mandatory is a strong word weekly loop. Yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, it is mandatory, right? But yeah, I guess. Really, for a lot of people, also, once you have a couple of legendaries that you're most excited about that you think you're going to use for most of the time, there's a clear point of diminishing returns for there as well. Yes, that's actually factual. For some players who may, personally, I love Torghast, and if it's not your cup of tea, you can start to back away from that at the point that you met those goals. Yeah, all right, that's fair. Definitely is mandatory for the first like few weeks though. Like you don't really have an option if you care to do any competitive content in any form or fashion. It's not really an option. You have to go in to get your soul ash to craft legendaries. Beyond that many players. Callings. Okay, doing their emissaries on a daily basis. A lot of the rest is going to be factored in what gameplay you prefer. All right, so we can skip the rest of that. Basically talked about like this is the important weekly shit. This is the important weekly shit. And then everything else is just like preferred content, right? Shadowlands delays and working from home. Did delaying Shadowlands cause a shift in future patch cycle? Will be similar cadence to BFA. Patch cadence is something we'll figure out details over the course of the next year. There's no question that for some parts of patch. In terms of gap between expansion and first major patches, I think what most players are concerned with, as are we, it's less the calendar month and more how long is the tier going to last. How long do I have to wait until I get new goals and the new places to explore? And that's something that I think we're pretty happy overall with how patch cadence in BFA worked. I actually agree with that. I actually thought that patch cadence in BFA was pretty solid. The 10-month long 8.3 withstanding, that's several. Yeah, I agree with that. But with the expansion itself, it was a pretty good approach, and we're looking to continue. I don't know how people in chat think about that, but I actually thought that the patch cadence for BFA was pretty solid in terms of like, I feel like the raid should come out at a certain point, and by and large, the raid came out like about when I felt like it should. Maybe it was a little bit quick from time to time, but overall, I felt like you had enough time to do all the content you really wanted to, get cutting edge, do raids, that kind of stuff. I felt like it was. Somebody in chat says most of the cadence was good, but Crucible's a bit quick. I actually think that the 2-boss tier in the middle of the patch was fun for like an extracurricular thing, but in terms of cadence, yeah, I actually think that it kind of did burst down their cadence a little bit. That's actually a good point. Are you happy with how your communication overall between the developer team and the players are throughout the Shadowlands beta? Something we can always improve at. It's almost impossible to communicate too much, yes. We, as much as possible, try to be transparent with what's going on. We want to get context, particularly during beta, to changes that people are seeing. No offense, sometimes when people are guessing at the intent of something based off data mined from fan sites who shall remain nameless, they may jump to conclusions. The only way that we can fix that is to get ahead of it, to explain, hey, this is what you're going to see. Either this is a change that is in progress, or you're going to see the rest of it next week, or this is what we're trying to accomplish. Do not be alarmed. It's a huge game with moving pieces, to say the least, and one of those challenges is balancing and the bandwidth of individual developers between making changes and working on the game and communicating those changes out. We have an incredible team community that helps us every step of the way there, but at the end of the day, for context for what was in the designer's mind when making the change has to come from that of the designer. We always want to do more and recognize that somewhat, particularly when there's so much happening at the same time, we are trying to hit a deadline, trying to get some major change rolled out. Communication may lag behind, but we can always do better. And the one thing that I can say is that we're always listening, even if we're not talking, even if we're not able to respond to every point through detail and real time. The things that are being discussed on our official forums, beta forums, Twitter, Reddit, everywhere is being absorbed and being surfaced and actively discussed amongst the team. Okay, so I actually think that this part on the back end is actually fair. I think that they are always listening and trying to make the best game. I think that as a whole, though, I think that Blizzard lets data mining of patches occur and doesn't provide context to some of the stuff that is occurring. I think that if they hit a Riot Games approach of like giving notes for like almost every single change that they made in terms of like class balancing and like other things, that would probably lend itself a little bit better, because more, like he says, more communication is better. So I think that leaving it less into the will of the reader reading it from data mine fan sites and actually releasing the patch notes themselves, I felt like would do a lot of good for the company. So, but who knows? All right, and with that said, that was the Ian Hazzikostas interview. Talked about a little bit of everything. I kind of gave my perspective on some of the most important things that I thought. Talked about crafting legendaries and like the Maw, Torghast, the Maw. Talked about Mythic Plus and classic Covenant swapping, Covenant balance, that kind of stuff. So that's going to be it. Overall, I thought that this was a pretty interesting interview. I feel like he ended up shedding a lot of light on a lot of things that have been kind of controversial from a player experience standpoint. And like you said at the end, they can always communicate more. Ultimately, I don't think that you should berate or flame developers, but yeah, I think that that's where I'm going to leave it. Be kind to people. Don't be an asshole. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in Shadowlands. Goodbye. Bye, everybody. Bye.